as much as the actual language of the policy matters, the uncertainty of flip-flopping back and forth is almost equally as challenging. But if you said what's the biggest issue of the day, it's figuring out the economics of production prospects for 2026, marketing prospects for the 25 crop. It's the economics right now of the crop sector.
Ag policy looks stronger on paper heading into 2026, but farmers and ranchers are still navigating a long list of unknowns, from trade and biofuels to farm program decisions and regulations that keep changing. What's been resolved, what's still unsettled, and what matters most as producers plan for the year ahead when it comes to agricultural policy? That's now on Nebraska Farmcast. From the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, this is Nebraska Farmcast. I'm Ryan Evans with the Center for Ag Profitability, and you can find our center's resources, including articles, live webinars, videos, podcasts, and more on our website at cap.unl.edu. Policy gains in 2025 gave farmers and ranchers a stronger safety net heading into the new year. But uncertainty still looms, from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act and a short-term Farm Bill extension to shifting trade conditions, biofuels policy, and a growing list of regulatory questions. On this episode, I'm glad to be joined again by Dr. Brad Lubben, Extension Ag Policy Specialist and Associate Professor with the Center for Ag Profitability here at Nebraska. Brad writes a monthly policy report column for Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and his latest piece looks ahead to what producers may be facing in 2026. We'll talk through what's changed in federal farm policy, how trade assistance fits into the current picture, where regulatory uncertainty remains, and what producers across the state are most focused on as they make production, marketing, and financial decisions for the year ahead. Brad, great to have you here again. Thanks for joining me.
Good to be with you, Ryan.
So the One Big Beautiful Bill Act was the biggest policy move probably of 2025. Can you just remind us what the main pieces are that directly affect producers in the act?
Well, think of it this way. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act was arguably the only real major piece of legislation that actually moved in 2025. And so attaching farm policy to that act was a way to get past the stalemate that had not given us a new farm bill in either 23 or 24. So the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OB3 as some of us are calling it, fundamentally included major parts of the Farm Bill: commodity program support, crop insurance additions, some conservation funding reallocations, and some substantial reforms or cuts to food assistance programs. Those are the four big bank accounts in the Farm Bill, and OB3 addressed those this summer.
And how should producers be thinking about the safety net that's now in place through 2031? Are there particular types of operations in Nebraska that stand to see the most impact?
Yeah. Well, clearly the safety net improvements are going to help producers that have already been participating in the program. Our traditional program commodities: corn, soybeans, other feed grains, other oil seeds. Those are commodities that have support in what we call Title I of the Farm Bill, even though it wasn't technically a farm bill or a title, but those are what we call Title I programs. Those programs provide either price loss coverage, PLC support, or agriculture risk coverage, ARC support to producers. And what we saw in OB3 was substantial increases in support pretty much across the board for commodities under those programs. That actually helps producers immediately because the changes in July attach already to the 2025 crop. Producers had already signed up and enrolled in the programs, but we've changed some of the numbers and some of the support, and there's stronger support already on the 25 crop, with the very important caveat that payments on the 25 crop don't actually arrive until October of 26. So there's this potential increased support coming, but it's effectively about 11 months away yet in terms of actually affecting cash flow. That's the kind of support that's increased in the program. That support also carries forward, and so the 2026 crop, as producers begin to make decisions now and into the new year, that's going to include farm program participation decisions that will be due by April 15th as per current information. And those decisions also benefit from that higher safety net, and a choice that producers again have to make between PLC or ARC on their program and on their farm.
And Congress extended the rest of the Farm Bill through next September. So a 1-year extension. Of course, we've been talking a lot over the last many months about the Farm Bill situation. So a 1-year extension. What does that uncertainty mean for programs like CRP or rural development? And how should producers plan around perhaps another short-term extension if that's on the horizon?
Yeah. It actually sort of glosses over much of the detail to say Congress extended the Farm Bill, because they did, but only after they saw it expire again. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act really took care of those 4 big bucket items, but that left lots of other programs and language to go, still awaiting Farm Bill reauthorization. And the same Farm Bill that couldn't get done in 23 or couldn't get done in 24 actually expired again in 25. And it wasn't until Congress passed the funding bill to reopen government in November that included language to extend ag appropriations and to extend the Farm Bill for another year. So we have those programs again in place, that continuing authority. We also have the same continuing questions of what's the long run outlook for these programs. While politicians have described, politicians as in ag committee leaders in Washington have talked about the need to push forward on a real Farm Bill to get the full bill across the finish line in time before the next extension expires next September. It's also sort of the challenge of, will it happen, or will we sort of live in this rut where we just continue to renew it 1 year at a time for the time being? If the big parts are now authorized through 2031, that actually even sort of creates less momentum for trying to get the other stuff done in a real way. It does at least suggest the possibility that we'll be living year to year for some time.
Now, obviously, trade policy swings throughout the year with tariffs, retaliatory moves back and forth, and several trade deal announcements have been making headlines for agriculture this year. And your latest policy report column in Nebraska Farmer Magazine was published at the beginning of this month, December, and that was right before the White House announced some perhaps expected relief for producers. If you want to get into what that announcement amounted to and how all of these events, the tariffs, the trade moves, retaliatory tariffs, everything has affected ag markets and how that impacts the outlook next year.
Well, let's back up to January. This whole year has been sort of inundated with trade headlines. The implementation of tariffs, whether it's a negotiating leverage tool or whether it's tariffs for the sake of tariff policy to try and support more U.S.-based production and manufacturing and so forth. But we have been strong on the roadway towards tariffs. There were tariffs. There have been retaliatory tariffs from other countries put on the U.S. in reaction to those tariffs. There were the so-called reciprocal tariffs that President Trump announced in April. But headlines have just been full of tariffs and retaliation and growing conflict and accumulating losses that producers are realizing as particularly agricultural commodities lose out on export opportunities like soybeans to China, but many other commodities and many other markets as well. Now, while there have been so many sort of trade conflict headlines, there have also been sort of this laundry list of headlines about trade deals. And the administration, to their credit, while they have sort of created conflict with the tariffs, they've also been negotiating deals with various countries to either roll back the tariffs or at least to come to some agreement on maybe a reduced base level of tariff activity. Well, that suggests some opportunities to either regain those markets or even to grow markets where we've sort of been disadvantaged for some time. That even includes China, where we saw substantial losses of ag market opportunities and soybean exports to China that just disappeared. Ultimately, to see a deal with China that says China is going to buy a minimum number of soybeans over the next few years. Lots of detail is still uncertain there, but amidst all that uncertainty, we we could more readily calculate losses than we could calculate promises for future gains. Well, along with that, then there have been many calls for assistance along the way. Ag producer groups arguing that if we're facing the brunt of these losses, we're going to need some assistance to get to the promised success in the future, and been described as particularly we need a bridge between sort of current economic realities and the future promises of better markets and better support. Well, back up OB3 that increased both commodity program support and crop insurance support does theoretically provide better support in the future. But once those programs start paying out next October, well, there's a gap between now and next October at least, or maybe even longer if the tariff and trade concerns continue. That's where producer groups have been arguing for we need assistance and we need more assistance and we need some help for the losses that we've seen. Ultimately, here in mid-December, early December, the Trump administration did announce a trade assistance package. Technically, it's a broader package than that, called the Farmer Bridge Assistance Program. The theoretical bridge, as I said, is from current economic concerns to hopefully future prosperity. But it's market losses due to trade conflicts and other unfair or challenging trade practices. It's economic concerns due to higher production costs and inflation pressure and so forth. So it's a broad analysis of sort of the economic need in agriculture and in crop production agriculture today. And that was the announcement. $12 billion in total, $11 billion of that to be allocated through a formula for planted crops for 2025 to help pay for that economic loss. Those are payments that have, with payment rates that they say will be announced before Christmas, and payments theoretically before the end of February. So some relatively quick assistance coming here if they can actually roll it out on schedule. For many producers, they've already got acreage reported to FSA, and the calculation might be automated, but there are also questions about how to deal with producers where maybe the information is still lacking. So not every question's answered, but certainly lots of assistance and some substantial cash flow coming here in the relatively short run.
Good. Is there any sentiment about, is this enough to bridge the gap until next October, next fall?
We could look at it economically and try and package together what is effectively multiple buckets of assistance. There's still assistance rolling out under the 2024 legislation for economic and ag disaster losses. And some of that assistance is rolling out now as we speak as well. And so there are multiple forms of assistance, and there's a large sort of aggregate dollar amount on payments from USDA to producers to help in the current situation. But if the current economic climate and the current trade challenges continue, many groups are already saying that this $11 billion or $12 billion in total, another $1 billion sort of covers everything else, but this $12 billion may be a down payment on what's ultimately needed. That remains to be seen. It's trying to figure out how big the gap is and how deep it is and how long we're really stuck in it. But it certainly helps at the moment, and not surprisingly, there's still political pressure to consider more.
Shifting gears to other things feeding into the outlook for ag in general, as we sit here at the end of the year, how do you see trade, and we've talked about trade, but also bioenergy factoring into ag's general outlook?
Well, I sort of think of them together in the sense of, in the middle of the current economic climate for agriculture, which is prices are down relative to where they were, and we're looking for what is that fundamental demand driver that might help reinvigorate ag markets. It's trade and it's bioenergy. Those are the two big demand drivers that we could expect to see growth in, if only the policy uncertainties were resolved. We already talked about trade and the tariffs versus the potential deals and the promises of maybe improved relationships going forward. But we could talk about biofuels policy too and be inundated with acronyms and policy decisions and market opportunities that may or may not be there depending upon how policy is unrolled. And that includes trying to figure out the role of traditional ethanol in the renewable fuel standard and the both the exemptions that sort of chip in at the required usage, as well as the potential rollout of year-round E15, if only there was some federal legislation that could get across the finish line to attach that to. That could grow markets for traditional ethanol, traditional biofuels, but we also see it on the biodiesel side or the renewable diesel side and the potential growth there in some of the renewable fuel mandates, either nationally or in particular regions. And then there's an awful lot of promise about if only we can figure out how to get biofuels into the sustainable aviation fuel market or even the maritime fuel market and the call for more renewable, sustainable fuels there too. Those are big potential pluses if the policy environment sort of allows the opportunity to work. The economics of biofuels into those markets is challenging. It's fundamentally not driven by the economics. It's driven by the environmental standards and mandates or commitments to more renewable energy sources. Agriculture could fundamentally benefit from that and play a big role if the policy environment for it works.
Speaking of standards and regulations, you write about that in the column as well as other important considerations for ag policy heading into 2026. There's a newly proposed WOTUS definition, Waters of the United States, a ruling potentially sending USDA back to rewrite biotech labeling rules, plus, of course, labor and immigration challenges that are ongoing. So from a producer perspective, what are regulatory issues that are carrying the most near-term risk, you think?
Well, it's a potpourri of issues. And you're right, I wrote about some of them by name only really to sort of stir the pot and note these, like many other issues, contribute to more policy uncertainty. WOTUS is an interesting example because we have effectively written and rewritten the WOTUS definition for about the last 15 years. Well, give or take. Waters of the United States is the definition of which waters are technically federal in terms of jurisdiction for Clean Water Act implementation and environmental regulation. Well, there's a definition that existed since the 1980s until it was tested in the courts. The Obama administration proposed a new definition after those court cases to try and clarify, and some would say to try and sort of strengthen the regulatory role. The first Trump administration worked to repeal that rule and write their own. The Biden administration worked to repeal the Trump rule and write their own. And now the second Trump administration is doing the same, working to write a new rule that will replace the ones before it. And so we have been on this roller coaster of, or a teeter-totter of this policy is proposed or in effect until it's tested in court, and then this policy, and then this policy. And as much as the actual language of the policy matters, the uncertainty of flip-flopping back and forth is almost equally as challenging. That's true for, in this case, Waters of the United States and environmental regulations, but it's true for lots of things. We have labeling rules for biotechnology disclosure, the use of genetically modified or genetically engineered food products or ingredients in food products, and the need for a label that discloses that. That federal requirement for labeling preempted individual states from coming up with their own labeling requirements. So there was a logic behind having a federal requirement. It was the first Trump administration that proposed the first rule about how that disclosure should occur. We are now into the second Trump administration before a court case finally sort of challenged that rule to say, but this way you do it is not sufficient. You have to go back and rewrite that portion of the rule. So even when we think we resolve something, years later, we're still talking about it.
Yeah. And
that's true of anything I wrote about and many more things. It's not that we can ever actually, how confident are we that we can actually resolve it, implement policy, and put the issue to bed? or are we simply sort of addressing the issue for the day and realizing that we're going to have to keep our attention to it over the long run?
Job security for a policy analyst like yourself.
That is true. There's that sort of reality that I essentially have the same speech prepared, and I've been giving the same speech for 20 years. It's just I have to make sure it's up to date.
And speaking of which, you were out giving that speech these last couple of weeks, or a version of that, updating on the outlook for ag policy in 2026 at some meetings across Nebraska that the Center for Ag Profitability held. As you were out there on the road, you had an opportunity to hear from producers attending those. So was there anything that comes to mind as common themes that they were asking about? What's on the minds of producers heading into 2026, do you think?
Yeah. Well, as we look ahead, and I get the privilege of sitting here at a desk and reading and writing about these issues and thinking about the full realm of policy issues and policy uncertainty and all the things that we have to pay attention to. And I write about that pretty regularly when I'm writing in the Nebraska Farmer or elsewhere. About the last paragraph is almost always, and farmers and producers and ag professionals will need to pay attention and be engaged and be involved. That's true. But if you said what's the biggest issue of the day, it's figuring out the economics of production prospects for 2026, marketing prospects for the 25 crop. It's the economics right now of the crop sector. We know that from earlier discussions this year of the farm income outlook and the divergence between the livestock sector and the crop sector. Were it not for a strong livestock sector and a big government paycheck, the Nebraska ag economy and the U.S. ag economy too would be really struggling. As it is, the aggregate numbers look okay, but the challenge is real for certain sectors, particularly the crop sector. And so it's those key issues of how do you manage risk? Well, that's farm program decisions to come. That's crop insurance decisions to come. It's also how do you manage costs, and those are the production costs and enterprise choice and other input decisions that producers have before them. So it is really honing down and bearing down on a pretty critical analysis of the bottom line, and that's what producers seem to be focused on today.
Great, and we should mention a couple of resources for listeners out there. You can find video recordings of the recent Cornhusker Economics Ag Outlook that Brad was a part of over the last couple of weeks, where he offered the policy outlook. We also have tax changes from Nebraska Farm Business Incorporated, representatives covering tax changes. Those recordings are available on our website at cap.unl.edu/outlook. I think we're planning a webinar coming up in early 2026, talking again about ARC and PLC farm program choices. Look forward to that being announced probably early in the year, or maybe before the year is out here in 2025. But as always, you can find a host of resources and ways to get in touch with us here at the Center for Ag Profitability on our website at cap.unl.edu. And Brad Lubben, I want to thank you for taking time again to chat with me on Nebraska Farmcast, and I will look forward to doing it again probably next month.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate the opportunity to continually come and talk about ag policy issues.
Thank you very much for listening to Nebraska Farmcast, a production of the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm Ryan Evans, and you can find a host of farm and ranch management resources, including articles, decision tools, videos, and more on the Center for Agricultural Profitability's website, cap.unl.edu.